In this set of videos, we're going to talk about string processing in R, and we're going to do this in 5 videos. This intro video followed by 4 others. We'll talk about 2 packages, Glue and Stringer. Glue is the smaller of the 2 packages, and it's used for mainly one purpose, which is called string injection. And the video also is relatively short. Stringer is a much larger package and really comprises a lot of the string processing things that we'll talk about. So we'll take 3 videos to do that. So what are Glue and Stringer? Obviously, we'll get into those more deeply in their own videos, but these are the tidyverse packages for manipulating textual data. Oftentimes, you'll hear this referred to as a string manipulation. Remember that R does not have a basic type of a character. So what we're getting here with a string is really a sequence of characters, and R is going to see that as a character vector of length 1. Other programming languages that do have a basic type of a character, in those languages, a string is a sequence of characters that would spell out something. Okay, now that something could be one word, like David, D-A-V-I-D, or it could be a whole sentence, or it could be a chapter, or it could be an entire book in one gigantic string. Okay, and the same thing is going to happen in R. The difference is that R doesn't have an indexable string. Okay, so you can't refer to like the third character of one string. It's just the whole string by itself. Okay. Now, string manipulation is really core for data science more broadly. So this is when you're moving outside of the context of numerical data and you want to analyze information that is not represented as numbers. So of course, you don't have any of the arithmetic properties and so on of these objects that you're trying to manipulate. You really have to use different tools. The kinds of operations that we're going to want to do instead of the numerical ones are things like detecting patterns, matching patterns, extracting things, and so on. And to do that, we're going to need to have something called regular expressions. So regular expressions are probably the single biggest topic in this area of string processing that we're going to need to learn about. And regular expressions are also strings. So the text data, sometimes we'll call this a corpus, is itself going to be one string, a character vector of length 1, or it's going to be a character vector, that is to say several strings, and each of the elements of that character vector is one string, and it's going to represent a word or a sentence or a chapter or something like that. A regular expression is, however, just one string, and its role is going to be to provide a means for us to communicate a pattern of textual data. I think probably the easiest way to see something like this is through email addresses or phone numbers. Everybody knows that an email address looks like, some sequence of characters followed by an @ symbol, followed by some sequence of characters, followed by dot, followed by some sequence of characters, right? So, David_Kale at Baylor.edu, right? Everything is something at something dot something, okay? Same thing goes for phone numbers. So phone numbers are area code plus, first 3 digits plus last 4 digits, right? Or 10 digits overall. Now, there's some variability with which people actually communicate those things, but that's the basic idea. So the question is, if we're trying to tell R to look through a body of textual data, we want to communicate the notion of we're looking for a pattern that's something at something dot something. But how do we do that? We do that with a regular expression. So we're going to have to take some time to kind of learn this little language of regular expressions, how we actually express ideas of patterns in textual data. Now, I want to say at the beginning, Glue is not a core tidyverse package. It's written by many of the same people, but it's not a core tidyverse package, so you'll need to load that one directly. Okay. Also, before beginning, I want to point out the differences between 3 punctuation marks that are usually considered to be roughly equivalent, or they look similar, or something like that, in how they function in the R language. So there's the single quote, or the apostrophe, the double quote, or sometimes just quote, and then, of course, the backtick. Now, these are going to be the same, meaning the apostrophe and the quote, the single and double quotes. Those are going to be more or less interchangeable in the R language, okay? They signify exactly the same thing, which is unlike the Linux command line. And if you don't remember that, we'll see that again in a future video very soon. However, they function identically here, okay? So here is hi with single quotes, here's hi with double quotes. Notice, by the way, that the single quote gets replaced by a double quote by R when it kind of parses it, okay? they're both used to create strings, okay? However, they are not identical. That is to say, those symbols are functioning the same way, but they're not interchangeable, okay? You can't actually just pair up a single quote with a double quote on the other side, and in that sense, they're not the same thing. However, in kind of every other respect, they will be the same thing, okay? One way in which you can leverage the fact they're not the same thing is to nest them. So sometimes you'll want to have a string that says something like this. She said, quote, wait, what do you mean? So you can imagine if you have textual data that's, for example, sentences from a book or something like that, there would be lots of quotes, and you would need to actually have some way of representing those quotes. But it's already inside of another string. So if you use the same quote, the double quote here and the double quote here, well, everything in between would be kind of demarcated inside the quote, and it would think that the second one is terminating it. So to prevent that from happening, it's very common to just alternate which quote you're using, okay? And notice that internally, R is actually going to change everything to double quotes, and anything that's internal will have this backslash in front of it. We'll talk about that in a little bit, okay? Now, as I said before, the Linux command line treats these two as different. The single quote is immutable, and the double quote is injectable, okay, by default. We'll see that in just a moment. The backtick in R is used to support non-syntactic names as parts of bindings, okay? That's to say you're going to store a variable, but the variable doesn't follow R's traditional rules. So something like hi in backticks is actually going to refer to the name of a binding, okay? A variable name in the R language, and here, of course, that's not defined, okay? Now, before we move further, I want to show you what my package setup looks like. These are the packages that I'm using. So when you run this, it's going to be obviously some point in the future. If you're getting something back that looks a little bit different, it could be that you just have a different version of the package. So that's the setup. Let's go ahead and move into Glue.